Now, in this lesson, our third lesson in Attic Greek, we will talk a little bit about the verbs. Here, a quick reminder. Each verb has 5 properties. The person, here we have first, second and third. The number, here we have singular, dual, which means exactly 2, and plural. And we have 6 tenses, 3 primary ones. Those are present, future, and perfect, and sometimes also not future perfect. And then we have 3 historic ones, which would be imperfect, aorist. We will go to what that is in a moment, and plusquamperfect. Now, the term historic tenses, also known as secondary tenses, refers to those verb forms in the indicative mode that denote past time. The primary distinction between primary and historic tenses lies, therefore, in their time reference. With the historic tenses, like the imperfect, plusquamperfect, and aorist, describing past actions, while primary tenses, present, future, and perfect, refer to present or future actions. So, historic tenses in the indicative mode are characterized by the addition of an augment, typically in e, to the verb stem, which we will see later on as well. They also utilize a set of secondary personal endings, and this classification is important for the rules of the sequence of tenses in more complex sentences, particularly concerning dependent moods like the optative, which is the wish form. When the main verb is historic, again, that it would be imperfect, plusquamperfect, or aorist, a dependent verb often appears in the optative mood. Ultimately, historic signifies a past time reference, with the specific historic tenses indicating different aspects of the past action. So, with that out of the way, we also have 3 moods: indicative, imperative, and conjunctive, and 3 voices: active, middle, which I will explain in a moment, and passive. Now, here in the Attic Greek, or generally ancient Greek, the verb also has 3 verb nouns. Now, those are verbals in English grammar. You may have heard of them. Basically, those forms derive from verbs that function in a sentence as a noun or a modifier, for example, an adjective or an adverb, rather than as a pure action verb. The infinitive, which would be substantive, that is, by the way, what we linguists are calling, what you are calling, nouns, while everything that can be declined is for us a noun. We like to distinct this just a little bit, but don't worry. Then we have the participle and, of course, verbal adjectives. So, next, we must notice we have 2 groups of conjugation, which are named according to the ending of the first person singular present indicative. Those would be, first, the verbs in o, which is an omega, and second, verbs in me. Now, the first group is by far the more common one. The other group is actually more ancient in form, and it does express things like the simplest notions, for example, being, saying, going, giving, sending. So, now let me explain you the aorist. Don't worry, it is not that complicated. You see, the aorist is a past tense that describes a completed or simple action, basically the perfect indicative. But there are a few differences worth noting here. You see, the main difference is that the aorist simply reports a single completed action in the past. For example, I walked, while the perfect tense emphasizes a past action with a result that continues into the present. For example, I have walked, implying I'm still in a state of having walked. The aorist focuses on the past event itself, while the perfect focuses on the present state resulting from that past events. So, the focus, a single completed action viewed as a whole. The aspect, often described as perfective or punctual aspect, meaning it is a kind of a snapshot of an action. For simplicity, the English equivalent would be something like a simple past tense. I walked, he said, and so on. Now, an example. In the context of an ongoing story, I walked to the store refers to the completed journey itself. You're no longer walking to the story. For example, because you arrived there. Thus, the destination has been reached and the action of walked has been completed. Compare this to the perfect. Here we have the focus of a past action with a continuing result or state in the present. For the aspect, we have a persistent state resulting from a completed action. Again, an English equivalent would be the present perfect tense. I have walked, he has said, and so on. For example, I have gone to the agora. This implies that you're currently still there. Now, the key differences in usage. For the aorist, this is a simple past event. For the perfect, a past event that has a present consequence. Then the time reference. For the aorist, the event happened and is over. No specific implication for the present. The perfect, the event is finished, but the resulting state continues now. And lastly, an analogy. The aorist is a snapshot of an event, while the perfect is a snapshot followed by a picture of the result. Other than that, the rest of the tenses are pretty much the same as the Latin tenses. Now, one thing to note about the historical tenses. The historic tenses do have a prefix in the indicative mood, which is called augment. For example, luo, and the historic tense would be luon. The perfects, plusquamperfects, and future perfect in all moods have a reduplication to the stem. Again, luo, le luca. So we have the lambda as a reduplication here. And again our e. Next, something about the moods. You see, the indicative and imperative differ mostly in their endings. So, let's have a look at the endings of the imperative. First, the active. We have the and to. Then, ton and ton. And lastly, te and nton. As for the passive, we have so, sto, then stone and stone, and lastly stare and stone. Now, the sigma, the s, is only used after a vowel, and we will get to this in a moment as well. The primary conjunctive is distinguished from the indicative by a long vowel. The historic conjunctive, it's iota, sometimes iota and eta or iota and epsilon, to the indicative, and this iota forms then a diphthong with the preceding hard vowel, which would be alpha, epsilon, or omicron, aka R, E, O. Thus, we would have I, E, Oi. Now back to the verbal adjectives. Here again, we have two different groups. First, here just the endings again, tos, te, ton, and second, theos, thea, theon. And these are passive in meaning. Again, the first group, for example, lytos, which means able, fit, or to be loosed. Comparing to the second group, lyteos, which means something like necessary to be loosed. Now, the first group is actually a passive participle, like for example in Latin scriptus. The second one is more like the Latin gerundive, for example, practeos, practea, practeon, which would be in Latin faciendus, facienda, faciendum, both meaning to be done, more or less, with small difference in nuances. Next, the voice. While active and passive are relatively clear in their usage, pretty much identical to the Latin ones, the middle sticks out a bit. As for the formation, the middle voice differs from the passive only in the formation of the future and aorist tenses. And for the meaning, the middle voice does have various meanings. The prevailing idea of being self-advantage. That means the subject of the verb is also the recipient or remote object. Thus, we do have the following three use cases. First, to do a thing for oneself. For example, in the active, lyö ton hypon, I lose the horse. In the middle, lyö mai ton hypon, I lose my horse. And the my horse is being implicated by the usage of the middle. Second, to get a thing done for, you guessed it, oneself. For example, jag ska mig ta en hyon, I get my son taught. And lastly, to do a thing to oneself. For example, lå mig, which means I wash, with the nuance of I wash myself. See? Pretty easy. Middle has the focus on you. That's it. So, now back to the two groups of verbs, and let's have a look at the verbs with or, because they can be even further divided by their verb stem. Here we have two overall groups. The first group is with vowel stems, and here we have two subgroups. First, the hard vowels, those are contracted. Here we have again a, e, o. For example, the mao, which means I honor. And then we have the soft vowels, uncontracted. Here we have e and u, for example, lyö, I lose, as well as diphthongs like ao, eo, u, for example, luo, I wash. And then the second group, consonant stems. Here we have four subcategories. First, the guttural mutes. Those are k, g, x, as well as s and t. The last two are double sigma and double tau. For example, we have plekko, which means I wave. Then we have dental mutes. Those are t, d, th, as well as z. For example, peitho, which means I persuade. And then we have the labial mutes. For example, p, b, v, as well as put. For example, typto, which means I strike. And then we have liquids and nasals. For example, r, n. For example, spero, which means I saw. Next, let's have a look at the conjugations, more specifically about the present indicative active. We're using the verb to raise, which is paideoein. By the way, the ein at the end signifies the infinitive in the indicative active. So, we have paideo, paideoeis, paideoe, paidoemen, paidoete, and paidoeusin. And since we are on this topic, I might as well talk very briefly about negations as well. You see, we do have two different kinds of negations. First, u, with alternations of uk as well as uch. And that says that something is not so or does not happen. U simply denies. The second one is me. That says that something should not be that way or happen that way. So me repels or defends. Now, a quick note on the three versions of u. First, u in front of a consonant, uk in front of a vowel, and u in front of an aspirated vowel, aka one with an h sound at the beginning, or also known as a rough breathing. Now, three simple sentences to demonstrate this. First, o pilos u cape. The friend does not write. O pilos u acque. The friend does not listen. O pilos u hypocue. The friend does not obey. Very easy sentences here, yet already our first steps on the shore of ancient Greek. Now, let's quickly look at the imperative. And by the way, if you need to negate the imperative, aka saying to not do something, just use me in front of the verb. Pretty simple. So, of course, for the imperative, we have singular, which would be e, and plural, which would be ete. Now, one example with a negated imperative, a very important sentence. When you want to avoid getting a dictator, just say me lue tus nomus. Do not abolish the law and hope he obeys. Next, let's look at the passive as well as the medium in the indicative presence. Here we are just looking at the endings. My, sai. We will get to this form in a moment because it is a bit special. Tai, meta, ste, ntai. And for the infinitive, stai. So, it would be too easy if we would not have a bit of an exception. You see, the sigma can drop between two vowels. That is called the drop of the intervowel sigma, and this can lead to a contraction. Let's have a look at this example. Normally we would have by the way psi, but we need to drop the sigma, thus getting pi the way ai. Yet epsilon and alpha, as well as epsilon and alpha iota, they contract, and getting, when it is epsilon alpha, eta. Yet we do have a diphthong where there is a iota involved as well. So we get an eta iota subscriptum. Thus we are ending up with pi the way. So what we are seeing here is first the drop of the intervowel sigma, which leads to epsilon and alpha, and this becomes eta. Yet again, we do have a diphthong, alpha, iota. So, this becomes simply a iota subscriptum. So, let us have a look at the paradigma with Paidiwen, Posidus, all in practice. Again, we have first person, second person, third person in singular, and then the same in plural. Paidiuomai, Paidiue, Paidiuetai, Paidiuometa, Paidiueste, Paidiondai. And note here, the first person plural. If you look carefully at the words, the accent is on the omicron and not the upsilon. And if you remember our previous lesson about accentuation, the accent can never be further away than the antepenultima, which again is the third to last syllable of any given words. And here we have tha, me, and o, which is its own syllable. And by the way, the infinitive here would be paidioestai. And to be honest, since it is getting already a bit long, I think we will stop here for this lesson and will continue in the next lesson. We have still quite a bit of way before us, but don't worry, it will be easy. We are doing this step by step, very slowly, and with no pressure.